After David Soul's passing on January 4, 2024, his former residence in Sevenoaks, Kent, became the subject of eerie speculation. Neighbors spoke of flickering lights, soft melodies reminiscent of Silver Lady, drifting through empty halls, and fleeting shadows near the windows. Whispers of a lingering presence turned the home into a local legend. In late 2024, the property was purchased by James and Olivia Carter, a couple drawn to its charm and history. Despite being aware of the rumors, they dismissed them as mere stories until they moved in. Soon after, they experienced unexplained cold spots, the faint strumming of a guitar when no one was playing, and the subtle scent of cologne in empty rooms. Rather than fear the unknown, the Carters embraced the home's legacy. They dedicated a room to Soul's memorabilia, inviting fans and locals to share stories and pay respects. Over time, the strange occurrences became less frequent, leading many to believe that the actor's spirit had found peace, comforted by the honor and remembrance bestowed upon him. The Carters had always been skeptical of ghost stories. When they first stepped into the house, its age was the only thing that unsettled them. The wooden floor groaned beneath their feet, the high ceilings carried whispers of drafts that twisted through the hallways, and the windows, tall and slightly warped with time, allowed just enough light to give the interior a golden, sepia-toned glow during the late afternoons. It was beautiful in its way, though it bore the weight of history. James had always been practical, the kind of man who needed logic to explain everything. Olivia, though, had a softness for the unknown. She loved old houses because they felt like living things, full of stories, echoes of laughter, and perhaps even sorrow. When they first toured the property, she had felt nothing ominous, just a quiet presence, a stillness that suggested it had not quite let go of its past. The first night in the house was uneventful. They unpacked what they could, setting down boxes in the grand living room where a fireplace stood unused but still carried the faintest scent of old ash. They sat on the floor, drinking wine straight from the bottle, laughing as they planned where everything would go. The house felt welcoming, though the silence at night was unlike anything they were used to. It wasn't just quiet, it was thick, as though the air itself was listening. It was in the early hours of the morning, when Olivia awoke to the sound of something soft, almost imperceptible. A note, a single, trembling note from a guitar. She held her breath, waiting for it to continue, but it did not. The house remained still. She listened to the silence for a long time before convincing herself she had dreamed it. The next day passed in a haze of unpacking, arranging furniture, and becoming familiar with the creaks and sighs of the house. James joked about the rumors, tapping on the walls and calling, "David, are you there?" Olivia rolled her eyes but couldn't shake the feeling that something was listening. Not malevolent, not even intrusive, just aware. By the third night, the occurrences became undeniable. The scent of cologne drifted through the hallway, something rich and old-fashioned, not like anything James owned. The guitar notes returned, fuller this time, strummed in a slow, deliberate manner as though someone was remembering a song they had played long ago. And then there were the cold spots, abrupt, startling, as if they had walked through an invisible threshold into a different time. James, ever the skeptic, checked for drafts, for old vents, for some rational explanation. Olivia, however, had begun speaking to the house in hushed tones when James wasn't around. "We're here to take care of you," she whispered into the quiet. "We mean no harm." One evening, as she sorted through an old stack of newspapers left behind in one of the storage rooms, she found something unexpected, a faded photograph tucked between the pages. It was David Soul, younger, leaning against the very fireplace in their living room, a cigarette in one hand and a half-smile playing on his lips. The sight of it sent a chill through her, not of fear, but of recognition. The house had belonged to him, and in some way it still did. And then, the first truly inexplicable event happened. Late one night, as rain tapped against the windows and wind curled around the eaves, Olivia woke to the sound of footsteps, not the creaks of an old house settling, but distinct, purposeful steps moving through the hallway outside their bedroom. She reached for James, shaking him awake. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He grunted, half asleep. "It's just the house." he mumbled, turning over. But Olivia knew better. She sat up, listening. The footsteps paused just outside their door. Then the handle moved. It didn't turn fully, didn't push open, just a slow, deliberate movement, as if someone was testing it, deciding whether or not to enter. Olivia held her breath. The silence stretched. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the footsteps retreated, fading down the hallway. The air in the room felt thick, charged with something unspoken. She exhaled shakily, her pulse hammering in her throat. The next morning, when she checked the hallway, nothing was out of place. No sign of disturbance, no evidence that anything had happened. But she knew, without a doubt, that they were not alone. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, cutting through the lingering shadows that clung stubbornly to the corners of the house. Olivia stood in the hallway, her bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floorboards, listening to the silence that stretched around her. The house was still now, as if whatever presence had moved in the night had retreated with the arrival of the sun. She glanced toward the door handle, half expecting to see some sign that it had been touched, smudges, a slight misalignment, something. But it was the same as always, brass polished with age, unmoving. A part of her wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to exhaustion, the way James surely would. But the sound of those footsteps had been too distinct, too deliberate. The scent of old cologne still lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. She followed it, stepping carefully down the hallway, past the framed artwork and the small table where she had placed a vase of fresh flowers the day before. The scent was strongest near the study, a room they hadn't yet had the time to properly explore. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavier, carrying the unmistakable scent of aged paper and dust. A large wooden desk sat near the window, its surface empty except for a single book left in the center, as if placed there deliberately. Olivia frowned. She was certain they hadn't left anything on the desk the day before. She stepped forward, hesitating only slightly before reaching for the book. The cover was worn, the edges frayed. When she turned it over, a chill ran down her spine. It was a biography, David Soul, A Life in Music and Film. Olivia swallowed. The rational part of her wanted to believe that it had simply been left behind by a previous owner, maybe tucked away on a shelf until it had somehow fallen onto the desk. But deep down, she felt something else at play. Something unseen, yet undeniably present. Later that afternoon, she finally mentioned it to James. They were sitting in the kitchen, the sound of rain pattering softly against the window panes. He stirred his coffee lazily, listening but not truly absorbing what she was saying. "Maybe you just didn't notice it before," he offered, not looking up from his phone. "Old houses have weird ways of making things seem off. But it's just in your head, Liv." She frowned, resting her chin on her hand. "I don't think so." James sighed, setting his phone down. "All right, so let's say just for argument's sake that something is happening here. What do you think it is?" Olivia hesitated. She knew how ridiculous it would sound out loud, but she also knew what she had felt, what she had heard. "I think," she started, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think the house hasn't quite let go of him yet." James raised an eyebrow. "You think David Soul is haunting our house?" She exhaled. "Not haunting exactly, but maybe he left something behind. Part of him. Some people believe that strong emotions, strong memories, can linger. Maybe this house was important to him. Maybe it still is." James leaned back in his chair, studying her. His expression was unreadable for a moment before he finally chuckled. "You always did have a thing for ghost stories." Olivia didn't laugh. That night, the rain continued to fall, heavier now, drumming against the roof in steady rhythm. Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled with the strange weight of the house. She had just begun to drift off when she heard it again. Soft, gentle, a melody, the unmistakable sound of a guitar, its notes floating through the house like whispers in the dark. The melody was faint, drifting like smoke through the hallways, settling into the quiet corners of the house. It was not the chaotic, discordant noise of something falling over or the creaking of old pipes. No, this was something precise, intentional. Olivia lay frozen in bed, her breath caught in her throat. The sound was coming from the study, the same room where she had found the book that morning. It was slow, almost hesitant, as if the unseen hands playing it were unsure, searching for the right notes. She turned her head slightly, glancing at James. He was deep in sleep, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythms. He hadn't heard it, or maybe he had, but, in the way of those who refused to acknowledge the things they couldn't explain, he had dismissed it in his dreams. Carefully, she pushed back the covers and stepped onto the cool wooden floor. The moment her feet touched the ground, the music stopped. She waited, heart pounding, the room suddenly feeling far too large, the silence pressing in from all sides. She strained her ears, hoping, half dreading, that the melody would return. Nothing. Slowly, she walked to the door, wincing at the soft groan of the floorboards beneath her. She stepped into the hallway, the darkness stretching long and unfamiliar in the middle of the night. The house had a different kind of quiet at this hour, not the peaceful stillness of a home at rest, but something deeper, heavier, like a held breath. The air felt colder as she approached the study. The scent of cologne, stronger now, wrapped around her like invisible fingers. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was unmistakable. She reached for the doorknob, hesitating only for a moment before pushing the door open. The study looked the same as before, the shadows stretching along the floor, the furniture untouched. The book was still on the desk, exactly where she had left it. But something was different. The chair had moved. It had been tucked neatly beneath the desk when she last saw it. Now it was pulled back, just slightly, as if someone had been sitting there. Her breath hitched. She stepped inside, her fingers grazing the edge of the desk. The wood was warm, not in the way of furniture that had absorbed the day's heat, but warm like something or someone had been there only moments ago. She swallowed hard, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her ears. "David?" she whispered, feeling foolish the moment the name left her lips. No answer. Of course not. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Maybe James was right. Maybe it was all in her head. And then, a sound. Not the guitar this time, but something softer. A sigh. A breath that was not hers. Olivia's skin prickled, the fine hairs on her arms rising. The sound hadn't come from outside, hadn't been carried in by the wind or imagined in the half-sleep haze of the night. It had been here in this room. Close. She turned sharply, her gaze sweeping the dimly lit space, expecting. What? A figure in the doorway? A shadow moving against the far wall? Nothing. The silence settled again, stretching into the room like a presence of its own. But Olivia no longer felt alone. She backed toward the door, her fingers trembling as they found the handle. As she pulled it shut behind her, she had the distinct feeling that someone was watching her go. She returned to bed, slipping beneath the covers with slow, deliberate movements. James stirred beside her but didn't wake. She closed her eyes, listening to the house. It was quiet again. Still. But Olivia knew better now. The house was listening, too. The following morning, Olivia moved through the house in a haze, her body going through the motions of making coffee, buttering toast, flipping absent-mindedly through her phone. But her mind was elsewhere, caught in the space between wakefulness and dream, between the rational and the unexplainable. James sat across from her at the kitchen table, scrolling through his emails, barely glancing up as he muttered something about contractors coming later in the week to inspect the roof. She nodded, pretending to listen, but her thoughts drifted back to the study, to the sound of the guitar, to the sigh, soft, human, undeniably real. The chair had moved. That was a fact. She had seen it, felt the warmth on the wood as if someone had been sitting there only moments before she entered. And the scent, that lingering, old-fashioned cologne. It wasn't an aroma that simply appeared in old houses. It wasn't musty wood or the damp scent of aged paper. It was something distinct, something personal. She needed to go back into that room. Later that afternoon, when James left to run errands in town, Olivia found herself standing in front of the study door once again. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of hush that felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were waiting. She hesitated, then turned the knob, pushing the door open. The scent hit her immediately, stronger than before. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning every detail. The desk, the chair, the bookshelves lining the far wall, everything was as it had been that morning. The air was still, heavy with something she couldn't quite name. She approached the desk and reached for the book again, David Soul. A Life in Music and Film. It was heavier than she expected, the worn pages crackling as she flipped through them. Photographs filled the middle section, images of him smiling, posing on film sets, candid shots of him in deep conversation, laughing, performing. And then, a picture of him at this very desk. Her breath caught. The angle was slightly different, but there was no mistaking it. The same wood grain, the same built-in bookshelves in the background. This was his house, his desk, his chair. A sudden, sharp creak echoed from behind her. She turned so quickly that her vision blurred. The chair, the one that had moved the night before, was rocking gently, shifting back and forth as if someone had just stood up from it. A deep chill ran through her, not just across her skin, but deeper, sinking into her bones. She wasn't alone. A soft gust of air brushed past her, stirring the pages of the book in her hands. Her breath hitched. She willed herself to speak. "Are you here?" The words sounded ridiculous as soon as they left her lips, but the moment stretched, waiting for something. A response. A sign. Anything. And then, a noise, quiet but deliberate. Not the guitar this time. A whisper. Not words. Not exactly just the barest hint of sound. Like a breath against her ear. She stumbled back, the book slipping from her hands and landing on the desk with a soft thud. The chair stopped moving. The air settled. And then, as if nothing had happened, the house was silent once more. Olivia backed toward the door, her pulse hammering. She didn't run, she wouldn't allow herself to, but her fingers trembled as they found the handle. She stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind her, her breath coming fast and shallow. She pressed her back against the wood, eyes squeezed shut. She could still smell the cologne. And she knew, without a doubt, that whatever presence lingered in that room wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting, and perhaps, just perhaps, it wanted something. Olivia spent the next few days moving through the house as if it were alive, as if every creak in the floorboards and every shifting shadow in the corners held meaning. She no longer tried to convince herself that she had imagined the whisper, the guitar, the moving chair. The house was not empty. But what did it want? She found herself drawn to the study again and again, lingering in the doorway, listening. The air inside was always charged, thick with something unspoken. Sometimes, when she entered, she could swear she felt a shift in the atmosphere, as if the room recognized her presence. She started speaking to him. At first, just in quiet moments when James wasn't around. "You lived here, didn't you?" she murmured one afternoon, standing by the desk. "You loved this house." The air remained still, but something about the silence felt aware. That night, she awoke again to music. It was clearer this time, the notes forming a melody she almost recognized. She sat up, her breath shallow. The sound wasn't coming from the study. It was in the living room. She slipped out of bed, her hands cold despite the warmth of the house. James slept undisturbed as she crept down the hallway, her steps slow and careful. The music grew louder as she approached. It wasn't eerie or ominous, it was gentle, almost nostalgic, as if someone were remembering a song from long ago. When she reached the living room, she saw it. The guitar. It was leaning against the armchair, resting at an angle that suggested it had been placed there, not abandoned. But they didn't own a guitar. She had never seen it before. She stepped forward, heart pounding, and reached out hesitantly. The moment her fingers brushed the wood, a voice, soft, low, close. "You hear me?" Olivia gasped, jerking her hand back. The room went still, the music gone as if it had never been there. The house was silent again. But she had heard it. Not imagined, not dreamed, heard. She stumbled back, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Who are you?" she whispered. The answer didn't come as words. Instead, the room felt full, as if someone stood just beyond her sight, watching, waiting. The guitar remained where it was, solid, real, a relic of the past or perhaps something more. Olivia turned and walked quickly back to the bedroom, forcing herself not to run. She climbed beneath the covers, trembling, her mind racing. She had proof now. She wasn't imagining it. And whoever or whatever remained in this house wanted to be heard. The next day, she did something she hadn't done before. She went to the local archives, searching for old records on the house. She already knew David Soul had lived here, but she wanted more. Had anything happened here? Had he spoken about it before his death? Had he? And then she found it. A newspaper article from years ago. An interview. A single quote that sent a chill through her spine. "I've always believed houses keep pieces of the people who live in them," he had said. "If you listen closely, you can still hear them." That night, she sat in the study, staring at the empty chair, the old book on the desk. "I hear you," she whispered, and for the first time the house whispered back. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.